Chapter 3 Attack on the Campus. It didn't seem as though he could be right. Freddie Simpson was sitting up in bed, and Nancy Summers was holding his hand. And because it was another day entirely, and the sunlight was flooding into the hospital room, old Simon Hodge's corpse seemed unreal, remote. The 4 students had trooped in to see Freddie, but Nancy was getting most of the attention. Nancy was a very intelligent, red-headed girl with a willowy figure and a face which was just right. The 4 students were badly smitten. They tried to hide their real feelings from one another, but Nancy was aware of how they felt. "You boys have been swell," she said. "Freddie seems to have a gift for friendship." "You bet he has," agreed Cummings. "We think a lot of Freddie. I guess he knows that." Freddie smiled wanly. His thin, freckled face was still abnormally pale. "I can't understand it," he said. "I had a dizzy spell. Nah, I didn't see anything. As soon as I stepped into the room, things began to swim, and I went out like a light." "You didn't cut yourself while shaving, Freddie?" asked O'Rourke. Freddie shook his head. "Of course not. I use an electric razor, except when I'm in a hurry." "Freddie, there's a big hole in your window screen. Know anything about that?" O'Rourke was holding his breath. He hoped that Freddie was telling the truth. "Not a thing, Terry. You say there were footprints in the soft earth under my window. Maybe a burglar was hiding in my room. Maybe he socked me from behind with a lead pipe or something. Maybe the blow stunned me so that I just folded without feeling it." "Yeah," agreed Limerick. "That would account for it." "Dr. Harlow thinks Freddie scratched his throat without noticing it," Nancy said. "He thinks he fainted when he saw the blood. Freddie says that's ridiculous, but some people do faint at the sight of blood. Perhaps Freddie saw the blood and it registered in his subconscious." "Now, Nancy, you know that's far-fetched," muttered Freddie, blushing slightly despite his pallor. "Blood doesn't affect me like that. If it did, would I be studying medicine?" "You're just a little boy in some respects, Freddie," said Nancy maternally. "If you've a psychological handicap, you should own up to it." "He fainted yesterday in the dissecting room," said Limerick, flashing a glance at Nancy, which said as plain as words, "Why don't you ditch the kid and take up with the real he guy, Nancy?" Freddie glared at him. "It was just biliousness," he said. "I've been studying too hard, and I allowed myself to get run down." "It occurred at a funny time," said Limerick mercilessly. "Maybe he had another bilious attack last night," prompted Cummings. "That could be," Freddie admitted. "I'm subject to them." When the 4 students left the hospital building, they exchanged meaningful glances. "We're in the clear," said Limerick. "He didn't even catch a glimpse of Simon." "And where does that leave us?" retorted Cummings. "Someone knows. Someone is in on it. Who returned Simon to the cemetery? It's blackmail I'm worrying about." "Who would want to blackmail us?" "I don't know, but someone pulled off a complicated body-snatching stunt. Did he do it for his health?" "I've warned you," said O'Rourke. "Simon Hodges is a vampire. He attacked Freddie, sucked his blood, and fled back to the cemetery." 3 scornful medical students, their skepticism restored by the sunlight, parted on the campus from one whom they considered a craven, superstitious fool, going their separate ways in silence. Limerick and Slater had lectures to attend, and O'Rourke a gymnasium workout. Cummings headed for the school library. He wasn't quite as skeptical as Limerick and Slater. The small dark girl at the withdrawal desk was Cummings' consolation date. Her name was Sally Sherwin, and she was almost as good-looking as Nancy. "What do you want with all these scary books, Empty?" she murmured as she passed over the counter Merrick's Vampirism in Europe, Dwight's The Vampire, Dunn's Superstitions of the Dark Ages, Aldrich's The Witch Cult, Street's Magic Talisman, and Wayne's Hungarian Legends. "Just amusing myself, Sally," Cummings said. "Sometimes I enjoy that sort of reading. Deep inside me, there is a repressed Edgar Allan Poe. Well, I didn't know you had literary talents, Empty. I have many talents, said Cummings. He put his arm about her shoulders and kissed her till she gasped. Fortunately, the library was deserted. Now why did I do that? He asked himself as he carried the books into a secluded alcove. I'm not in love with her. There is supposed to be some connection between fear and amorous impulses. Perhaps I'm more frightened than I suspect. I wish to hell O'Rourke had kept his trap shut. The books were horribly depressing. Merrick, Street, and Wayne professed to disbelieve in vampires, but something had unquestionably scared them. Every page he turned carried shrill and hysterical admonitions. Dwight refused to commit himself. Dunn wavered between belief and skepticism. The most reassuring sentences were in superstitions of the Dark Ages. It was commonly believed that no vampire would attack a man or woman bearing a cross and protected by a necklace of garlic. It was also believed that no vampire could leave its grave before sundown. Ambrose Pare observes, however, that heavily overcast skies often lure vampires from the earth, and that during thunderstorms they range the countryside with a hellish and illicit greediness. It was also believed that vampires could imitate the voices of the living and insinuate themselves with diabolical cunning into the domiciles of maidens. Cummings was so absorbed in the Middle Ages that he scarcely noticed how dismal the library had become. Hunched and purplish shadows clustered about the deserted book racks, and the sunlight which had been pouring down through the tall windows behind him had ceased to warm the back of his neck. He closed the book at last, stacked it with the others, and returned the entire pile to the desk. "I'll call for you at 8:30, Sally," he said. Sally Sherwin scowled. "You know what happened the last time we went stepping. You kept me out so late, I lost my date privileges for 2 weeks. "I'm sorry about that, Sally," said Cummings contritely. "It won't happen again." "I'll say it won't. You've seen to it that I can't walk out of the dorm with you like a decent girl. I have to sneak out by the window." "It's more romantic that way," said Cummings. "I'll be under your window at 8:30 sharp." Sally sighed. "All right, heartthrob, but if it rains, the date is off." "If it rains? Why should it rain? There wasn't a cloud in the sky when I—" His speech gelled. The dismalness which had crept over the library could mean only one thing. During his researches, the sun had ceased to bathe the campus in a warm and mellow glow. Turning from the desk, he hurried along the deserted corridors of the library building and out onto a broad stretch of lawn. The campus was bathed in an ominous negation of light, which struck a chill to his heart. The ivy-draped quadrangle of dormitories and lecture halls loomed eerily through the murk, their Gothic outlines reminding him of something out of Sir Walter Scott. He stood before the library building, staring in amazement at a running figure. The figure had emerged from the Hall of Pharmacy and was running straight toward him. A slim, pale girl running. He recognized her instantly, despite the darkness. "Nancy!" he exclaimed, and strode forward to meet her. She swayed when she saw him, and tottered forward until she was in his arms. "Nancy, what is it?" Sobbingly, she clung to him, her whole body trembling. "It's Slats," she moaned. "They've taken him into the pharmacy building. Oh, it's horrible, Empty. His throat is torn, mangled. He's drenched with blood. He's dying, Empty. There's nothing they can do for him." Cummings turned deathly pale. He stared at her aghast, cold perspiration breaking out all over him. When did this happen, Nancy?" "They found him in Norwood Lane about 10 minutes ago. You know how dark it is there, even when the sun is shining." Cummings knew. Norwood Lane ran between the Hall of Pharmacy and the hospital unit. It was simply a narrow alleyway between the two buildings, a sort of lover's lane where students made out in shadows on their way to the lecture rooms. Brick-walled and ivy-festooned, it offered a seclusion for furtive embraces at high noon and for more leisurely love-making after dark. "You mean you were there with him, Nancy?" Nancy Summers shook her head. "I was coming out of Doc Whitehead's classroom when they brought him into the hall. I was so sickened I just ran, Empty. I know it was cowardly, but I couldn't help it. My stomach twisted, and I had to get out fast." Cummings nodded. "I understand, Nancy. It was perfectly natural. We knew Slats, loved him. He was a great little guy. He had his faults, but there'll never be another Slats." "I just ran, Empty. I wasn't looking for you or anybody. I just wanted to get as far as I could away." Sure, Nancy. I understand," Cummings soothed. "Empty, his throat was horribly torn. Do you think it was an animal, a rabid dog?" "There are no blood-sucking dogs, Nancy." "A bat, then. Empty, isn't there a huge South American vampire bat which attacks men? Perhaps one of those bats was shipped north in a crate of oranges or bananas, escaped, and crawled into a hollow tree somewhere on the campus." Cummings' face was grim. "No, Nancy, the blood-sucking bat of South America has a wingspan of scarcely 3 inches. It couldn't tear a man's throat or suck more than a thimbleful of blood. The big South American bats are fruit eaters, perfectly harmless." "But something fiendish attacked Freddie last night, and now Slats. Oh, Empty, I'm frightened."